Friends, Kris here. I'm excited to have you with me today because we're starting a new series. From time to time this year, I might be doing a character study. And today I want to do that, talking about Jonah. Now, here in Branson, we have Sight and Sound Theater, and one year they had a great production on the life of Jonah. And that so excited me and interested me in this prophet of the Lord. I want to use for a title Billy Graham's title. He called it Jonah, the Inside Story. Well, that is the inside scoop. Somebody said Jonah was a little down in the mouth, I guess. Don't Jaws. He was swallowed up by the fish. And you wonder why you or maybe somebody you know is swallowed up with life and swallowed up with terrible circumstances. Well, it's so that God can bring you to a place of tweaking and turning you towards your divine appointment and destination in life. And I want to talk about that. There are 4 chapters in Jonah. Each talks about Jonah running. You know, years ago, Nicky Cruz of the Mama Gang in New York got saved in the early days of David Wilkerson. That's what propelled Teen Challenge. He wrote his biography, Run Baby Run. And the same can be said about Jonah, because in chapter 1, Jonah was running from God. Say that, from God. You don't want to run from God. The first time we see that sentence in the Bible is in Genesis 4 and verse 16, where it says, Cain went from the presence of the Lord and lived in the land of Nod. You wonder why you're living in the sleepy zone, the land of Nod, why people won't even give you a nod. Well, it's because you're not fulfilling the destiny of the call of God for your life. Now, the Lord said, I want you to go to Nineveh. Nineveh is somewhere in the Kurdish, Turkish area of northern Iraq. Instead, he went from the presence of the Lord to Tarshish. If the history book Tarsussos is right, then that means he went all the way to Spain. He wanted to get as far away from God and God's calling as he could get. And listen, that kind of disobedience only takes a person down. Now, this is going to be good news, but it starts with some bad news. He went down to Joppa, down to the port, down to the ship, down to the sides of the ship, down into a deep sleep, down into the fish, and then down to the bottom of the sea. And we don't know how much farther Jonah would have went down had it not been for the grace of God. So number 1, running from God. But in chapter 2, we see Jonah running to God. Because when you get swallowed up, and listen, you may not be swallowed by a fish. There are people swallowed by jail incarceration, swallowed up by financial problems. You ever heard anybody say, man, that thing is eating me alive? You may be swallowed up by an addiction. I don't know what your situation is, but Hosea 5 and 15, it says, in their affliction, they will seek me early. And that's what Jonah did. He turned his face toward Jerusalem. Now, I don't know how you find Jerusalem in the bottom of a fish's belly, but somehow the human heart, the spirit, has navigational gear that will lead you home. And Jonah cried out in Jonah 2 and verse 9, salvation is of the Lord. Let me tell you something. Your salvation's not from a guidance counselor. It's not from a bank loan. It's not a new house, a new spouse, new car, or a new cat. What you need is one thing alone, and that is to turn your face to God. And then in chapter 3, when Jonah got spit up on the dry ground, we see him running with God. I love that. Luke 1 and verse 37 says, with God, nothing shall be impossible. And he made a beeline for the city of Nineveh, running with God. Became a street corner preacher and cried out 40 days and Nineveh shall be destroyed. Now let me tell you something. Jonah still smelled like the fish belly. I would just as soon hear a preacher that's got one sermon like Jonah had that turns a nation to God than to listen to the finest educated preacher there is. By the way, Jonah did have an education. 3 days, not in Yale College, but in Whale College, and he came out with a 4.0 average. So look at chapter 4, running from God, to God, with God, and then we see Jonah running ahead of God. You know, sometimes you have to pull back the reins on preachers and say, whoa, hold your horses. Because Jonah was wanting Nineveh to be like an Hiroshima mushroom cloud. He thought God was going to wipe it out. But listen, God's ways are higher than your ways. Wait on him. He wanted to save Nineveh. He wants to save America. He wants to save you. And the thing is, you just have to trust that God has it all under control and don't get ahead of him. Wait on him. We're to talk about that this week. I hope you'll be with us. If you like, share this with your friends. And let's get ready for some great teaching on Jonah, the inside story.